A lot of people have said we will never be able to address the global problem of climate change if we have countries that are not industrial nations that are still developing. They can't use fossil fuels and cheap energy to industrialize like nations in the West have. A big reason for that is because many of these nations were colonized by nations in the West. But it's a big question now. What do we do to support their transition to renewable energy? Because we know we have to if we want to keep living on the planet, nothing major. So Biden has promised $11.4 billion each year for developing countries to ease climate impacts and help them shift to renewable energy. But the vast 1.7 trillion spending bill to keep the United States government running, passed by the Senate on Thursday, includes less than $1 billion in climate assistance for those countries. So a little bit about what is in the bill. The bill, which is expected to pass the House and be signed by the president, includes $270 million for adaptation programs, largely for countries in Asia and the Pacific Islands, along with $260 million in clean energy investment aimed at Africa. Another $185 million will go on sustainable landscapes programs. So when we think about how much has been promised each year, 11.4 billion, and only $1 billion being given, I just think about how much money US-based multinational corporations have extracted from developing nations, nations that we promised this money to. How much money have we made over them over the centuries, where we've exploited their labor and extracted their resources, oftentimes having friends in the State Department ensure that the CIA would coup anyone who was unfriendly to our extraction of their resources or exploitation of their labor. Probably billions and billions, if not trillions of dollars in value worth of labor and resources. So we've intentionally made resource-rich nations financially poor over the years so that they can't afford this transition to renewable energy. Not only that, but industrialized nations that were often the colonial empires were also the same countries that were emitting a ton of carbon and polluting the world and making the planet unlivable and creating conditions where climate disasters will disproportionately affect these nations in the global South. Makes a lot of sense. It seems like spending this money is not just the right thing to do so that we transition to renewable energy and can continue to live on this planet, but also as a form of reparations for what we've done internationally to all of these different societies around the world. So The Guardian reported that developing countries will need anything from $340 billion to $2 trillion a year by 2030, according to various studies, to cope with the cascading impacts of global heating. Now, when asked about what's going on with this spending, a White House spokesperson said that the $11 billion target is a top priority for us and critical to the success of President Biden's climate agenda, and the president has made clear that he is going to fight to see this fully funded. So Biden's presidency, to me, as someone who believes politicians generally should make good on their promises and their campaign promises, because that's what you were elected to do. If you run on a particular platform, you're getting the votes because of that platform. And it's turned into Scott's taunts on The Office, from student loan cancellations being promised throughout his entire race. And not only that, but when he was in public office, he promised to cancel much more in student loans. We shouldn't say forgive, because we're not being forgiven for wrongdoing by taking out loans to go to college. The transition to renewable energy, another promise he's made to invest in domestically that he has not made good on. Union support. He said he would strengthen the NLRB and support unions if elected into office. And he's just forced rail workers into a contract. I mean, seriously, his entire presidency has been a Scott's tots of campaign promises that have not come true. And that's also true for developing countries that should be able to transition to renewable energy with the rest of the world so that we continue to have a planet. It seems simple to me. Rayyvana?
Yeah, anytime a politician says something is their top priority, just know there's no way in hell that thing's ever happening. If it was your top priority, it would have been done. It wasn't. So So clearly it was not your top priority. I also want to say that you were spot on connecting the extraction of these resources to these multinational corporations. I mean, we saw this with Ecuador. Chevron poisoned the water there, destroyed their ecosystem, caused people to die of cancers, caused severe birth defects. And they're so deeply interlocked with the, judicial system in the United States. I mean, for the love of God, there's a doctrine in the law called the Chevron doctrine, but they were able to use their connections with the Federalist Society to these judges to ensure that they would never have to pay a dime, despite having the largest fine placed against them in environmental justice history for what they did in Ecuador, and they'll never have to answer to that. And we'll see, and that's why for politicians, it's not their top priority, or it's their top priority to address these climate change issues, because what is going to hold them accountable when these multinational corporations who are helping fund their campaigns, they know that they're never going to get in trouble for what they're doing. It's all on the back burner. We've got a Supreme Court that's constantly undermining the ability of the EPA to go after these, climate polluters. The whole system is not structured to benefit the people who are the most damaged by, by climate change, people in these developing countries, and they're not getting the justice they deserve. And even when they're supposed to be receiving it, the United States steps in and prevents them from receiving any sort of, retribution or any sort of, financial restitution for what has happened to them, let alone preventing it from happening in the first place.
Yeah, and not to mention like the Bretton Woods Accords and how much we decided to make the dollar the currency standard for the entire world, and then sold debt to nations, said, hey, like you're gonna need some dollars to fund your development. No, they won't. These are resource-rich countries that were pretty much fine and sustainable until colonizers came in and destabilized them and taught them different ways of creating energy en masse. I mean, to address this as if it's like the United States helping out developing countries that are struggling, it doesn't make sense, because really, we created the instability in so many of these countries. And if it wasn't the United States, it was another imperial power in the West that should also be giving some of their wealth to the transition to renewable energy to address a problem that they've created. And the way that the framing is in mainstream media, that it's some form of charity whenever nations in the West are giving any kind of financial support or technological support to other countries, it doesn't make sense, because all of their wealth was extracted and stolen. And then we destabilized them politically and tried to impose Western values upon them and Western religions upon them. That's extremely destabilizing for a society, let alone the way we've cooed democratically elected leaders in government for resources as well. And then to say, it would be really nice of us to give them $11.4 billion. It's a top priority for us. We haven't done it yet. How many more days do we have? 3 days, Joe, to make good on that promise. Why promise the $11.4 billion in the first place? It does not make sense to me.